Hey everybody, welcome to the PLC for High School Dance. This is our second webinar of the season. I hope by now that your shows are over and you can breathe a little bit and you are easing into holiday break here in a little bit. I know for me this is the last week, so really excited about finishing up the semester and getting those 2 weeks of rest in, which we just need so much. So this webinar is called Facilitating in the Dance Classroom. So I want to try to break down some of the norms in the way we teach a dance technique to our students. In dance, we have very long held traditions that might be hard to let go of because it's what we grew up with, it's what we know. But the students that we are teaching today are quite different than students that we had 10 years ago, or quite different than how we were students in our classrooms growing up. So I'm really wanting to take a look at how we do those things and make sure that we're teaching to the students in front of us and giving them what they need rather than trying to fit them into a model that might not work or that they can't relate to. So for the first segment, I am going to, I have a video for you that introduces some new ideas. Then in the subsequent segments, we will break down the ideas a bit more, and then we'll take a deeper dive into what it all means and how we can reimagine our dance classrooms. All right, enjoy the video.
This presentation will discuss teaching versus facilitating in the dance classroom. We know in education, especially secondary education, the lecture and the demonstrate and do model is inefficient. Students all have different learning needs, so teachers need to understand and know their students in order to differentiate instruction for the best learning outcome. This is true in all school subjects, and it is no different in the dance classroom. In order for this to take place, we as dance teachers need to get to know our students, listen to our students, allow them to have a voice in what they are learning and how they are learning it. Hopefully, this presentation will get you thinking about reimagining how we teach our dance classes. If we begin to reimagine what the dance class looks like, unlimited options with and for our students will emerge. First, let's examine the traditional methods of teaching dance. It is traditionally authoritarian in nature. We have deeply held traditions passed down from generation to generation. The teacher is all-knowing, the sage on the stage, so to speak. The student stands or sits quietly trying to learn and then emulate what they see. While this may work for some students, more recent data tells us that the 21st century learner needs to collaborate and be hands-on, so to speak, in their learning process. What dance ought to be. Generations of dancers were expected to be silent, stand with our hands behind our backs, because hands on our hips was very disrespectful, and we were not to ask questions. All of this taught us what dance ought to be. We were supposed to watch, then emulate what we saw. We know now that this is an ineffective method of teaching at best. But how do we break this deeply held tradition for the next generation of dancers? Authors Shillcutt, Oliver, and Aranda write, quote, specific authoritarian teaching behaviors evidenced in dance technique classes can escalate to humiliation of students for making errors, screaming, sarcasm, mocking, belittlement, barbed humor, and bullying, end quote. I'll be honest, this is the way that I was taught dance. I came out of it with a few scars, some physical, some psychological. But if my dance classes were more of an exchange and collaboration with the teacher, I have to ask, what kind of dancer would I be today? I did pass down some of these ways to my students, not so much anymore. However, I did help in perpetuating these traditional methods because that is what dance is, or so I thought. I believe it is now time to reevaluate how dance technique is being taught in our dance studios. There is a much better way. Facilitation. What is it? Quote, facilitation is a vital effort to build a community and world that is suitable in participants' global views and perceptions, end quote, from Public Health Notes website. What does that look like in the dance classroom? Well, that would be questioning and answering, discussions, partner work, group work, individual work. What it doesn't look like is your traditional dance class. What is the role of a facilitator? A facilitator is an experiential guide, leading students to ask questions, explore ideas, challenge norms, and find their own learning methods. A facilitator is a motivator, motivating students to solve problems and seek solutions to barriers. A facilitator is an enabler, enabling students to be successful at their own learning pace. And finally, a facilitator is a partner in education, a guide on the side, so to speak. I liked this quote talking about teaching. The art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. Mark Van Doren. The roles and goals of facilitation. Roles. Student facilitator relationship. The facilitator and student establish shared expectations. A facilitator shifts ownership of the learning process to the student. The facilitator connects with each student and makes the process rewarding and enjoyable. Manage learning activities. The facilitator uses a facilitation plan. They intervene on process rather than content. They foster documentation of learning and bring closure to activities. Data collection. The facilitator is continuously assessing. Goals. Facilitation guides students to actively perform the work needed to achieve the learning outcomes. It fosters a learning environment that is growth-oriented, learning-centered, and student-centered. It helps students learn to engage with the content. It is inclusive of all students in the learning process, and it gives assurance that all students' voices can and will be heard. How do we facilitate in the dance classroom? First step, start to reimagine what a dance class could look like using 21st century teaching and learning methods. Try to clear your mind of the way it used to be. Second step, work with the dancers to set an accountability system so that each individual and the group is accountable. This could be classroom rules, dress code, participation, etc. Step 3. Moderate discussions, ask questions, and encourage participation from each and every student to contribute ideas to guide the curriculum. Step 4. Collectively come up with lessons that inspire the dancers to investigate the content by self-learning, working with partners, and working in groups. Step 5. As the teacher/facilitator, constantly use formative assessment, formal and informal, as the dancers work through their learning process. Now that we have defined facilitation and have discussed what it could look like in the dance classroom, let's recap all the important points. Facilitating means moving away from the traditional authoritarian method of teacher as all-knowing, with students standing quietly, watching, then emulating. Students are not encouraged to ask questions or take a hands-on learning approach in this method. This is the demonstrate and do method, and it is ineffective at best. A teacher who grew up in this system, as myself, we cannot perpetuate these methods, and we must try to move the dance classroom into the 21st century so that it utilizes more up-to-date teaching and learning methods. A facilitator is a guide, a motivator, an enabler, and a partner in education. Some roles and goals of facilitation are: a facilitator cultivates a unique relationship between the facilitator and the student. A facilitator manages the learning activities that are performed in the dance studio. A facilitator collects data and is constantly assessing each student. A facilitator guides students to actively do the work to achieve the desired learning outcomes. A facilitator fosters a positive learning environment that is growth-oriented and student and learning-centered. Facilitation helps student engage with the content in a positive way. Facilitating guarantees the inclusion of every student in the class. And facilitating makes sure all diverse voices are heard. When all of these pieces of facilitation come together in a dance classroom, they become a central point from which unlimited options emerge. And when these options become accessible to students, finding their personal and artistic voice becomes possible.
All right, so that was, let me move myself here. That was the overview of what I mean when I say facilitating in the dance classroom rather than teaching. So again, it's so hard to let go of what we know and what we grew up with to try new things. But I think if we can start figuring out what might be harmful rather than what would be positive and good to do, I think that, okay, cut that out. 3, 2, 1. It is really, really hard to let go of what we grew up with, and it's hard to try new things. So I totally understand that. But I'm really passionate about bringing dance into the 21st century. And I think if we give students agency in their learning, they will be able to understand, they will be able to just love dance more so than if we continue with some harmful traditions that we have. So anyway, there's just a little graphic over here, teaching versus facilitating. So the last thing I want to do for this segment is just ask you to do a reflection of how you are teaching. Do you teach in the exact same way that you were taught? Do you use the same language that your teachers used? I was a demonstrator for Milton Myers for 3 years in college, and I do find myself using some of the same language that he used still. And that was, I was back in the early 90s when I was in college. Now, he was a very uplifting and positive teacher, so I think that I took the best from what he did and passed it down to my students. But I'm sure we've all had some bad experiences with negative teachers. So I just ask you to reflect on how you are teaching your technique in your dance classroom so we can take a look at it in the next segment. All right, I will see you then.